Mining is nearly half the economy. How much of that wealth actually stays in Nunavut?
Not enough is staying in the territory.
Can Canada credibly claim Arctic sovereignty if the people living in the Arctic still face overcrowded housing, unreliable infrastructure, and limited access to healthcare? What are your thoughts on Prime Minister Mark Carney?
John Main, Premier of Nunavut, interrupted the Secretary of Ilakagarok Nunavut Muni Takuya Naumi.
Thank you so much for being willing to join us today. It's an honor to have you on the show. Would you mind briefly introducing yourself for people who might not be acquainted?
No, thanks for having me. Just pleased to have the opportunity to chat with you today. John Main, I'm the Premier of Nunavut, also Minister of Finance. I grew up here in Arcvet, Nunavut, ever since I was an infant. And so my parents both moved up north before I was born. And Arcvet's been my home since I was an infant. And I'm here at home right now. I'm looking out the window, so apologize if I seem distracted. But I was elected in 2017. First elected to serve as a member of Legislative Assembly for Arcvet North, Whale Cove. So I represent part of my home community of Arcvet as well as a neighboring community, Whale Cove. And my first 4 years, I was a regular member, which is kind of an opposition role in our government. And I was reelected in 2021, and I served as Minister of Health for 4 years. And then recently, late last year, I was reelected for a third term and appointed as Premier. And so, great to chat today.
Tremendous. You govern around 41,000 people living in 25 fly-in communities across 1.9 million square kilometers. About 84% of residents are Inuit, and only about 1 in 5 lives in Iqaluit. For someone who has only seen Nunavut on a map or heard about it in an Arctic sovereignty announcement, what is daily life actually like, and what do Southern Canadians most often misunderstand about your territory?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that I could unpack there, but I think just maybe something that you mentioned in terms of the territory's geographical kind of standpoint and where we sit. So it's 25 communities, all of which are only can be reached either by ship in the summer, by boat, by snowmobile in the winter, or by airplane. We don't have any road networks going between communities or to southern Canada. So that's kind of one of the biggest things that I lay out to folks who have never been here, is that it's a huge part of Canada's landmass, about 1/5 of Canada's landmass, about I think about a third of our coastline, if not more, and 25 communities, which are all beautiful in their own way. They're all unique in terms of where they're situated, most of our communities are on the sea. We have one community that's on a large lake, that's Baker Lake. And in terms of daily life, there's so much beauty here in Nunavut. The wildlife that provides for us, the sea, the land, Inuit culture, I think imbues every part of life here. And as someone who's non-Inuk and grew up here, to parents who were settlers here, I feel so grateful to call this place home. It's not without its challenges. We have a lot of challenges in terms of daily life, everything from healthcare to unemployment to food insecurity. But at the same time, it's such a beautiful part of Canada. And I always say to fellow Canadians, if you've never visited, you should think about it. And it's really special.
Who shaped your perspective on leadership?
Hmm. Yeah, I think a number of folks who were in political leadership as I was growing up. Nancy Lindell is one of, I think she's been a great role model for many of us. When I was growing up, she was our MP, Member of Parliament. And so just seeing her working, this would be in the 1990s, the difficult decisions that she had to make, the way that she represented our growing communities with such grace and dignity really was an inspiration. And so to see her filling the role as senator now is just there were so many of us who were overjoyed to see her appointed as senator, because she just has that breadth, broad experience, municipal, federal, and now filling that role as senator. So looking at folks like Nancy, Senator Lindell, I should call her, just so much that I have learned and, continue to learn from people like her.
Before entering politics, you worked as a CBC North reporter. What did journalism teach you about asking governments tough questions?
Yeah, I think working in the media, although it was pretty brief for me, it taught me about the importance of transparency, the importance of being available. I remember, working in the media and then having difficulty finding people to speak on a specific topic and getting so frustrated when person after person says, no, I don't want to be interviewed on that, or I'd rather not comment. So I'd like to think that I haven't entirely lost that. And also, I think just, I respect the role of the media, whether it's traditional media like CBC or newspapers, or, newer media like podcasts. It's important for folks who are in leadership to answer the tough questions. And, as much as we try to dodge around the tough questions, that is part of our job. We have to be accountable at the end of the day to the voters, to the media, and explain why we're doing the things we're doing. And that feeds into kind of decision making on big issues in the territory. Like, for example, we had a recent decision on the Nunavut land use plan that our cabinet took, and it was contentious. It continues to be contentious. It's difficult. These things are not simple. If it was easy, it would have been done already. So, I look at issues like that and being able to look at all the different decision making points and the pros and the cons and the reasons for and against, and at the end of the day making a decision, standing by that decision, and explaining to the public why you did what you did. That's just so fundamental. And the media play a role in that, of course, making sure we're not just doing whatever we want without explaining.
But has being inside government made you more sympathetic to public officials or more critical of how slowly institutions often move?
Yeah, I think being in government has given me a greater understanding for the complexity of decision making processes. Like when you're on the outside, it seems pretty simple. This is a problem. Get money for this thing and then fix it. Resources and money are a big part of what we need, infrastructure, program, services, but at the same time, it doesn't solve everything. Looking at our healthcare system, for example, past years, increased money flowing into our healthcare system, increased staffing levels, increased program allocations, but at the same time, it's delivering and making sure the services are reaching the residents. Like, it's still, there are additional challenges beyond just finding money, logistical challenges, making sure we have enough staff housing for the staff that we hire. Being in government, also having served in an opposition type role, it's given me a good perspective on the ins and outs of the system. But I'm my own worst critic. In terms of being more sympathetic, you know, I I beat myself up quite a bit because I want to see stuff done, and yeah.
How much pressure do you feel in regards to the vulnerable communities that are relying on you and your other leaders to try and push forward on some of these things there? Like as a chief myself, like many people don't understand the conversations I'm having or the strategy that I'm trying to implement. You don't get to tell all your citizens what you're working on every second of every day. And
Yeah.
so they have to have a lot of faith in you and in people like myself to really be putting in everything you can to bring change that's going to improve their lives. How much does that impact you?
No, I feel quite a lot of pressure. Like to point out that it's not all falling on me. I have an incredible group of colleagues in our cabinet who are working very hard on the important files from housing to education to healthcare, um, power generation, drinking water, essential infrastructure. You know, so I have support in terms of my cabinet colleagues, also in terms of the incredible staff we have working in the government. There's a lot of folks who care deeply, but at the same time, yeah, I feel the pressure. We have a housing crisis. We have mental health outcomes that are terrible in terms of issues like suicide. We have way too much food insecurity and poverty happening. And so, yeah, the pressure is there and it doesn't really go away. But at the same time, I'm sure you can relate to this. That's the driving force, right? That's what gets you not necessarily out of bed, but that's what gets you around the table and pushing for better, pushing for more for your residents. That the fact that the status quo is not working for so many folks is not lost on me, and government needs to work its butt off. And there are a lot of great people who are. I can attest to that. On behalf of our residents, and the pressure is there, and one of the most frustrating things I'm finding lately is just the amount of misinformation that we're dealing with around on social media, and just things that are simply not true that are floating around and kind of changing the way people think about government and changing the way that people think about society. That's really troubling. And that's where I think media, whether it's a podcast or whether it's traditional media, it is part of the solution. It is part of working towards a better future, is this open communication and sharing truth telling.
Nunavut does not have political parties, as you mentioned. Candidates run as independents, and after the territorial election, the MLAs meet as the Nunavut Leadership Forum, question the candidates, and select the premier and cabinet by secret ballot. Why does that consensus government work for Nunavut?
Yeah, I think it is working for us. We're not seeing a lot of partisan bickering. When you come from the consensus model, and then you go to a jurisdiction where there is a partisan, whether it's one of our provinces or even federally, and it's there's just this toxicity, and red team versus orange team versus blue team, green team. It's a real difference from what we operate within. So the consensus model is what we've been using, and it is, I think, working for us, just in terms of the amount of dialogue that is focused on the issues and not necessarily this team versus this team. Yeah. So it's a pretty special model that we share with the Northwest Territories, and we are held accountable as members of government. You know, I lead a cabinet that can never exceed, based on our rules. The cabinet and the premier can never have greater numbers than what are called the regular members. So the uh, opposition role. And so we are continually, perpetually in a minority government situation. And so, similar to what you see in a partisan model, when you're in a minority government, you have to work with the other side closer. So, we're always working with the regular members, always working with them to find points of agreement and try to bring them along, get their support. Because without their support, we can't pass a budget, we can't build capital projects, we can't get anything done. So, we need each other. And it's that mutual respect kind of foundation that we're trying to maintain under the consensus model.
You mentioned transparency. Should the public know how each MLA voted for the premier?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's been discussed over the years, in terms of doing it as an open vote as opposed to secret ballot. Um, yeah, I could see pros and cons. The secret ballot model, I think one of the advantages to it is it makes it easier for, once the leadership forum happens, it's easier for everyone to come back together and focus on the tasks at hand as opposed to, you know, focusing or ruminating around who voted for who. And so that is one of the advantages for the secret ballot model. But I certainly, and the open vote would also have some pros. I can see either side.
Should Nunavut ever consider directly electing its premier?
That's something that was looked at a couple governments ago, and there have been uh, discussion paper type looks at it. Um, right now, under the consensus model, uh, you know, I think one of the advantages is that you look at the premiers who have served. They've been from a number of different communities, and not necessarily, from the single largest community. And so, in terms of changing seats and changing perspectives, I think that's one of the advantages of how it works right now. Um, if we were doing direct election of a premier, I'd be concerned around perhaps things skewing towards our largest community, Aqalwit. But that being said, there might be ways to mitigate that.
What mandate did voters give you?
Well, in terms of the mandate I was given, it's specific to my constituency. And so, looking at Alved and Whale Cove, I ran on a platform looking at infrastructure development, looking at need for continued housing development, education to continue to be a focus along with healthcare. So it was a largely constituency focused platform that I was elected with. And then when I was put into the role of premier and given cabinet colleagues to work alongside, one of the first tasks we did was develop a mandate. And that's something unique to the consensus model. So looking at our mandate, the government's mandate is called Ikayoktigikta, which means let's work together, let's help each other. And so our mandate is pretty broad. We want to do a number of things focused on communities, strengthening community life, conditions for residents, but then also looking at longer term goals, building the territory in the longer term. So our mandate from a whole, a snapshot, economic development, social supports, continued focus on housing, as well as longer term infrastructure related goals to drive the territory forward. So looking at things like energy, looking at essential infrastructure and collaborating with the federal government. So we've got a lot of work to do. We're not yet 1 year into our mandate. and it's targeted for a 4-year term.
What is the one result your government must deliver above all others?
Well, the one result, we have to move the needle on the key files, and so that's touching on housing, that's touching on economic development, food security, mental health, and primary care. We have to move the needle, and we need to make a real difference in residents' lives. And so it's not necessarily one file that I'm looking at. It's a number of files, because we recognize for each family and each community, it might be different priorities that they want to see. So, yeah, I wish we could just focus on one thing, because that would make it a lot easier to progress. But it's, as you can understand, you're looking at infrastructure, for example. Are you going to invest in a school? Or are you going to invest in a health facility? Are you going to invest in, drinking water infrastructure? Are you going to invest in power generation? These are all like key building blocks of healthy communities. And that's one of the messages I keep sharing with federal colleagues is, what we're pushing for here in Nunavut. These are the building blocks of a strong Arctic and the secure Arctic and healthy communities, drinking water, reliable power, uh, adequate schools, adequate health care. We're not asking for, we're not asking for things that are extra. We're asking for the basics. And so that's our continued message, and that'll continue to be our focus.
You are the first non-Inuk premier of a territory created through Inuit political leadership and the Nunavut Agreement. You raised Arvia and speak Inuktitut, but familiarity does not eliminate the need for accountability. What does continually earning the trust of Inuit communities require? And apologies for missaying some of those words.
For me, it's as I mentioned earlier, it's just been incredibly humbling to be put into this role as premier, and it was through my colleagues. At first it started with the voters in my constituency who elected me to this role, and then through the leadership selection process, being put into this role, I am accountable to my colleagues in the government. I'm accountable to the voters who, you've pointed out, our territory is 85% Inuit, and I wouldn't be in this role if it wasn't for their support. And it's support that I don't take for granted. I am pointing out that I am not Inuk, and so there are certain things where I do rely on Inuit to speak to when it's inappropriate for me to speak. I believe in a strong relationship between the public government that I'm leading, which was established through the Nunavut Agreement. A strong relationship between our public government and Inuit organizations in the territory. So whether it's Nunavut Tungavik or the regional Inuit associations, there's a lot that we can get done together between our public government and the Inuit organizations. And so, I think the way to answer that question is I don't take it for granted, the support that I've been given. I recognize that Nunavut is the Inuit homeland. Recognize that my parents and my family are settlers here, and continually looking for ways to uphold the trust that's been placed in me and to meet the expectations, which are high. So I hope. And in terms of being able to speak Inuktitut, it's been an incredible gift that was given to me by community of Alviet and colleagues and folks I grew up with. And, it's opened a lot of doors for me. I fully recognize that. And, it's one of the things that our government wants to do is look for ways to strengthen the use of Inuktitut, strengthen Inuit culture within government and in the territory. So, but, one final thing on this maybe, that Article 4 of the Nunavut Agreement established that it would be a public government. And so it's through that article where non-Inuit such as myself are able to serve in leadership roles.
May I ask, what do you find fascinating about the language?
Inuktitut, it's a beautiful language. It's there's many things that are fascinating about it. Just some words, the way that the words are structured, or if you look at the root of certain words, it's quite. I don't know. I'm not a linguist, so I'm not, the best person to speak about it. It's very elaborate and very eloquent in the way that words are structured and phrases are structured. And also just having the privilege to travel around Nunavut, different dialects, different words, different terms for things are very continually interesting. And I'm always being corrected on the way I say things or learning on the fly. And so, if there's one thing I'll tell you, I make a lot of mistakes when I speak Inuktitut. And I'm so grateful for people who correct me or who give me new terms to use when they notice that I'm repeating the same words over and over.
I think one of my favorite parts, just hearing you and your team communicate with each other, is it's a very gentle language.
Yeah, like it's very. I'd agree with that. And depending,
Like, I just hear German and it sounds very rough and like a much harder language than what I heard you guys saying.
Yeah, and depending, like I mentioned, different parts of Nunavut, or Inuit Nunavut, where people speak in different ways. We tend to like to hear other dialects spoken. Like they sound very exotic or very out of the ordinary and super interesting.
Shortly after your first election, you told Mount Allison University that Nunavut's three central challenges were better healthcare, employment opportunities, and education and training. You said they were interconnected. Education leads to employment, employment improves health, and healthy people are better able to participate in education and work. After 8 years, and after your own term as health minister, which of those three have materially improved, and which do you acknowledge needs much more work?
Yeah, I think we've seen improvements on all fronts. I think over the years, the government has made expansions to services, um, expansions to infrastructure. But again, it comes back to that key challenge around population growth that I was mentioning, and just the rapid pace with which our communities are expanding, and also the challenges that we're facing expanding as well. So, when it comes to healthcare, things are still extremely challenging, whether it's staffing or infrastructure related. The real challenges are there. They continue to impact residents, but we've seen expansions in things like in-territory elder care capacity. We've seen expansions in terms of cancer screening. We now have our first, formalized cancer screening program, and hope to see that expand into other types of cancer in the future. In terms of education, the number of graduates continues to increase. The number of students attending school after high school continues to increase. We just put major resources behind an expansion to our student funding model. So we now have one of the most generous student funding models in the country, I believe, in terms of the supports that we provide to post-secondary students. Economic development, there's still a lot of room to expand access to employment for Nunavut residents. We have quite a, I don't want to say terrible, but quite a troubling reliance on imported labor, whether it's in traditional industries like construction and accommodations or hotels, or even in mining and fisheries. So a lot of room for us to expand, and they are all interconnected, as you mentioned, the healthcare, economic development, education. So I have to continually tell myself, if we are able to make an improvement on education, it is going to bleed into better health outcomes. It's going to lead to better economic outcomes. So the problems are connected, but then the solutions are connected too.
Your latest budget raises health spending to more than $663 million, an increase of approximately 14%. The federal agreement also included $74.1 million for federal infrastructure over 3 years. Yet many residents still have to leave their home communities, and sometimes Nunavut entirely. What medical services should a Nunavut resident reasonably expect to receive close to home by the end of your term?
Yeah, in terms of the care that can be provided at home or in their home community, it really varies. We have the most limited capacity in our smallest communities, and that's just due to the size of our health infrastructure as well as the health staffing complement in our smallest communities. So it can vary in terms of what Nunavut residents can expect closer to home by the end of our government. I think we want to see the continued expansion of virtual care, which has been incredible since COVID pandemic. Just the number of different specialities that we can provide in residents' home communities. We have something like close to 40 areas of specialty medicine that we can now provide virtually to a certain extent. And we're equipped for virtual care right across our communities, right across the 25 communities. I think one of the biggest goals in terms of healthcare that we have is just greater access, greater predictability in terms of that access to a primary healthcare provider. We had terrible staffing shortages following COVID, which led to reductions in our service offerings across the territory. We've kind of turned the corner in terms of our staffing. Things are looking up. And so, being able to have that baseline foundational access to primary care is huge, as well as making sure that we're continuing to invest in prevention in terms of public health. Things like vaccines, things like screening for chronic diseases, support for chronic diseases. Those will be huge in the coming years. And one other area that I want to, or two other areas that we are working on quite hard is, support for expectant mothers and their infants. That's something that has been an area needing attention for a number of years. We're looking to reestablish birthing services in more communities. It's a longer term project, but it's one that we're committed to. And then one final issue I mentioned earlier was elder care, and looking for ways to provide more support for elders in their home communities, whether it's through things like accessible transport vans or through expanded long-term care bed capacity.
More than 60% of Nunavut rely on public housing. Recent reporting placed the public housing waitlist at approximately 3,700 applicants, while roughly 45% of residents in public housing were living in overcrowded conditions. The Auditor General found weaknesses in how housing condition, allocation, and progress were being managed. Nunavut 3000 promises 3,000 additional units, across the housing continuum by 2030. Is Nunavut 3000 still a credible target?
Hmm. Yeah, our government is still committed to the Nunavut 3000 plan. It's worth noting that under that plan, not all the work has to be done by the Nunavut Housing Corporation. There's components or elements of that plan where they'd be working with supported housing developers, be working with the private sector. So there is still a big burden or a big duty in terms of the public housing component that falls to the Nunavut Housing Corporation, but there's also things like supports for homeowners, supports for the private sector. So there's no question that housing remains a key challenge. It's a key file that impacts so many parts of life up here. And, the crux of it, a large part of it is due to our rapid population growth and things like poverty, things like the need for greater economic development and education, so that folks can be more self-sufficient. And the Nunavut Housing Corp continues to work hard on implementing the Nunavut 3000 plan, and we are seeing units being completed across the territory. The Auditor General's recommendations were valuable. Housing Corps responded to those and are making changes in accordance with those recommendations. So, it's full steam ahead on housing, and recognizing it's one of those key files, like I think anywhere across the country. It's a huge topic right now, and understandably so.
Government actively represents approximately 28% of Nunavut's economy, while mining represents nearly half. Of roughly a $3.5 billion in forecast territorial revenue, approximately $2.47 billion comes from federal transfers. Does Nunavut currently have a diversified economy, or does it essentially rest on two pillars: federal spending and resource extraction?
Yeah, there's no question that we're hugely dependent on federal transfers, hugely. And we recognize that looking at it from a finance perspective, it's a weakness of how our government operates. So we want to diversify or strengthen our revenue streams that are not federally oriented. That's a thing that will take a long time. Looking at like our devolution agreement, for example, there is a potential there for increased revenues to come to the territory through royalties if there should be mining development or other development on Crown land. But like I said, that's going to take a long time. And so for the short term, medium term, we are going to remain hugely dependent on federal funding sources to fund public services for our residents. But at the end of the day, we're young, and we need that support. We feel that, other parts of the country were provided similar supports when they were, young as we are. Our government's only been around since 1999. There's still a huge amount of foundational infrastructure investment that needs to flow to bring us up to par with the rest of the country. And so, as much as we recognize that, yes, reliance on this federal funding source is a vulnerability for us, we feel that it's a just and a justifiable situation for us, given that we're not yet on par with the rest of the country in terms of foundational infrastructure.
Mining is nearly half the economy. How much of that wealth actually stays in Nunavut?
Not enough. Not enough is staying in the territory. You look at the GDP numbers, it's impressive. We have the highest GDP per capita in the entire country. But if you come to any of our communities and you speak to people, you're going to see signs of poverty and signs of food insecurity. And so that points us in the direction of needing to extract more benefit from the mining industry, from other industries like fisheries. We need to make sure that employment opportunities are being maximized, and that we as government are helping to pair up our labor force, or ready our labor force for employment in these key sectors. And so, it's not necessarily government sits on the sidelines and criticizes and points the finger. I envision our government being a partner, an active partner in getting more employment, more opportunities for residents in our rapidly growing communities. We know we need those jobs. We need those jobs for our families. And my hope is that in coming years, we're going to see reduced reliance on fly-in, fly-out labor.
What are your thoughts on Prime Minister Mark Carney?
I think it's exciting to have a prime minister who's, raised in the north for parts of his youth, and the focus on the north is apparent, not just from the prime minister but also from his cabinet. I don't know that we've ever had this much northern representation in terms of a federal cabinet. And in terms of the challenges facing the country, facing Nunavut, whether it's around Arctic security and sovereignty and threats to, Canada's claim to the north, or, the very real economic challenges that we're facing, I think he's, the Prime Minister's the man for this moment. And when we look at things like threats of tariffs from south of the border, we just came out of a meeting of Canada's premiers. We met with the Prime Minister, and I can say that we're fully united behind our Prime Minister and support his leadership in these challenging times. It's stressful, concerning for a lot of us right across the country, and it's times like this that leadership is tested. It's not an easy role. There's a lot of burden that rests on the Prime Minister's shoulders, I'm sure. And we're fully, premiers, I for one, am fully behind him in terms of wanting to stand up for Canada and make sure that we get through these challenges together and stronger.
Are you able to share some insights on some of the nation-building projects that may be coming to your territory, including the Grays Bay Road and Port, the hydro fiber link, and this deep sea port?
Yeah, I think it's quite a remarkable time where, in terms of these nation-building projects, first off, that they're being led by Inuit development corporations or Inuit-owned interests. And, that's a change from previous, if we look maybe a couple decades ago, these would have been projects that would have been put forward by the territorial government. And in the past, the territorial governments tried, and we still do have projects that would be considered major in terms of the scope, but looking at the Kivadla Hydro Fiber Link, the Iqaluit Hydroelectric Project, or the Grays Bay project, they're all being led by private Inuit-controlled interests. And as a public government, we're actively supporting these projects and actively engaging with the proponents, recognizing that it can't just be them on their own who are going to get these projects over the finish line. There's a role for the Nunavut government to play. There's a role for the private sector. There's a role for the federal government. So it's exciting times. It's part of the foundational infrastructure that we need, is potentially through these major projects to drive the territory forward in the future. Like, no connections to southern Canada, no power lines going to southern Canada, no fiber optic connection to southern Canada, no roads, no railroads. So in terms of trying to build an economy or trying to build the future of the territory, we do need this nation building investment.
Supporters argue they could lower energy costs, open access to minerals, expand fisheries, and strengthen Canada's northern presence. Critics may reasonably worry about environmental risks, boom and bust development, outside ownership, and public infrastructure being designed primarily around industry. What enforceable conditions must accompany these projects to ensure Inuit communities receive enduring wealth rather than temporary construction jobs?
Mm. No, great question. I think, a big part of that is what I mentioned around the ownership and the leadership component coming from within Inuit organizations. And, my hope is that ownership stake or that controlling interest stake would help to drive the benefits in the long term. When it comes to environmental impacts, that's where I think we do rely as a territory and we do trust in our institutes of public government. So we have Nunavut Water Board, the Nunavut Planning Commission, and the Nunavut Impact Review Board, who work and look at development in the territory and ensure that it's done in a way that benefits are maximized and negative impacts are minimized. And as a public government, we do engage and we do participate in environmental assessment processes. And so, no matter which project it is in Nunavut and whether it's being led by an Inuit organization or by a mining company, that's the bar that they have to meet, is they have to get the approval, they have to get a project certificate through these bodies. And the Nunavut Impact Review Board, when they issue a project certificate, whether it's for a new mine or a major project in the territory, they'll have conditions that they'll attach to that certificate, and those conditions are binding. They're not negotiable. Proponents can't just take the project certificate and run. They are held accountable through the environmental assessment process for the impacts going forward. So that's a process that is very foundational to the territory, and it's one that we trust in as a government.
On April 1st, 2027, responsibility for managing most public lands, natural resources, and water is scheduled to transfer from Ottawa to the government of Nunavut. It is one of the most consequential changes in the territory's political development since its creation. What will devolution allow Nunavut to do on April 2nd that it can't do today?
No, great question. Devolution, it's been a long time in the works. It's took years and years of negotiations, and in the last government, our previous Premier of Nunavut signed the final agreement, and I was there for the signing. It was a momentous occasion. It was huge for the territory, and we are the government that is going to implement devolution. We're committed to doing it right. We're committed to doing it in a way that ensures continuity and reassures investors, reassures stakeholders all around the territory. And so the biggest change is going to be decision-making power in terms of land use and projects. It'll go from the signature on a project being required from a federal minister to a Nunavut government minister. So that'll be a big moment, and just the power shift in terms of the responsibility coming to our government, that'll be the biggest change. But with increased responsibility comes increased pressure, increased scrutiny. So that's where we are committed to doing it right, to making sure that we're not cutting corners, and to making sure that we are ready for April 1st when it comes. And as we sit now, I'm looking forward to April 1st. It's going to be an incredible day, and we'll see the creation of a new Nunavut government department to take on these new responsibilities, and really looking forward to it.
And the whole interview is the nuance with Aaron Pete YouTube ku tak tinok sakto yung naksin for interviewing with John May of